Hello. Wow, it's been like a week and it feels like it's been forever since I've talked to you last. That's wild. Lots gone on. Just personally, I have moved to Georgia. Let's see here. My parents came to visit. I saw the ship Argo for the first time. Yeah, and then astrologically, a ton has happened since we last talked. Most importantly would be the solar eclipse in Aries, which won't happen again for another 8 years. We had the equinox from Pisces into Aries. Wait, I think we had talked before that, but the biggest one was Neptune moving into Aries for the first time in 165 years. That's a big deal. So, anyway, my mental space has been moving a mile a minute. I don't know how you're feeling. I feel like I'm making connections of little trenches I dug 15 years ago, 7 years ago, 4 years ago, and they're just like firing and coming together. So in this talk, I have many things I'd love to say. I want to keep it improv like I have been doing, because it's really good for my mental space to see what I can funnel through in an improv way. But there's a bunch I would love to try to articulate. So let's see what I can do. First is, I want to say that I am going to, probably right after publishing this video, I'm going to change the name of this channel officially, hopefully permanently. It's currently called Sethianseth. I like Sethianseth. I think it's funny, it's punny in a certain way, but I also find a great affinity with the philosophy of the Sethian Gnostics, which we can talk about that some other time. But I love what the Gnostic mythos did to what I grew up with, which is the traditional Christian story. Kind of basically flipped it on its head and makes you think about it in a whole new way. That's really cool. So I identify with that sort of rebel nature. However, I don't think that I'm super resonant with Earth as a prison and planets as our prison keepers, really, which is the very most pessimistic world, everything is a matrix, there is no free will kind of like view of this idea. So I'm going to change the name. I'm not identified with that anymore, while I do honor it. I realized last year that when I begin offering astrological services, it will go under the name One Wonderful Astrology. That also now feels like it collapses things too much. This is my personal page. I would like this to be the spot where I just talk to you and tell you the stories, tell you what my mind's doing, point to my sources, put the pieces together in a freewheeling kind of way, do things like this Decan walk, and then always smile when it launches. It's going to be it has process at its foundation, so it will be a process project. However, it will be the more polished form of things. This is going to be the behind the scenes curtain. What's going on? Messy, warts and all. The name that I'm going with is One Wonderful Cosmos instead of One Wonderful Astrology. That speaks to my love of storytelling and myth, and how I believe that our personal stories are reflected in the stars, are reflected in our myths. And the more that you dig into the current understanding of science, when you dig into concepts like quantum mechanics, when you dig into cosmology and physics, the story's written there too. And it's pretty miraculous to put all the pieces together. Okay, so one wonderful cosmos. Welcome. This is hopefully the last time the name will be changed. Hope you're not surprised. Hope you like. Okay. So, why always smile, actually? I haven't really talked about that yet. Always Smile came out of a love of Brian Wilson's long-lost Project Smile. I will do much more talking about that mythology. But what is Always Smile? Always Smile is related to some pretty clear marching orders I feel that I got back in like 2020, which was the idea that I was to be rebirthing myth in this coming age, and that the only way that would be done is through an embodiment practice, and that first I would retell my own story, reimagine my own story through myth, and then I would take that apart, share it, and then hopefully out of that process of doing that, I would have gained some tools to help others do the same for themselves if they like. I think that there's something very fundamental about that calling for the age that we're coming into. Telling our personal song in a new way, the way that only we can. Because of that, I will always tell you to shy away from, encourage you to shy away from anyone who makes you feel like you need them as a source of authority. My goal in any of this is to share my process. I don't need your validation in sharing my process. In fact, it's pretty vulnerable sometimes to share my process. But I share it in hopes that it might inspire you to do the same yourself, your own way. So, you have somebody that you really like, you're learning a ton from, that's amazing, that's great. You can become a devotee, but I would seriously caution against anyone who suggests to you that they alone hold the keys to the future or to your understanding or to your ability to evolve, anything along those lines. Enough said about that. My myth, personal myth, exploded first in song and then also in this weird little illuminated manuscript that I have right here. All encounter is a reunion. I think that we're leaving a time of forgetting and entering a time of remembering. We remember our personal history as it's reflected in the stars. We remember our collective history as we move to the next chapter. And it's a birthing process. It's a rebirthing process. And anybody who's ever been anywhere near childbirth, which I have not personally, would tell you that it's a really messy, violent process. It's scary. If you didn't know what was going on, you'd think that it was really, really bad, really, really bad, but it's beautiful. Anyway, so I think we're rebirthing. And my messy process came through this book in such a messy way, where it is all corners, all four sides of the book, written in the margins, written in form of the flip through like the old flip books. And it's been my job over the last few years to decode, put the pieces back together, see what I am intuitively trying to tell myself. That's been fun. It's also been very frustrating because sometimes it feels like I'll never be able to get it done. However, this last couple weeks, once I started this Decan walk, it has seriously sped up the process. So, let's sweep up from the last one and remind of some of the concepts that I kind of glazed over because I didn't quite have them anchored. I think I've anchored a few more. Let's talk first about the Kabbalah Tree of Life things. I talked about four worlds, going downward in terms of emanation, downward into rarefied to dense, okay? Those four worlds are called Atziluth, which is associated to fire, the most rarefied. That is the world of emanation. Next is the world of Bria, which is associated to water. That is the world of creation. Next is the world of Yetzirah. No, Yetzirah is the world of creation. Bria, well, okay, so I'm kind of getting there. Yetzirah is associated to air or swords. And then finally we have Asya, which is associated to earth, and that is the world of action. The two middle ones I'm messing up, but we go from idea to form to action, generally speaking. Okay, and then we have the Sephirot, which are the 10 emanations. Those are not to be thought of as gods. They are to be thought of as channels through which the divine expresses their will. Those are situated on the Tree of Life, starting at the top, the Keter, which is the crown. That, according to some, not all, is where the aces of the tarot reside. It is associated to the number 1, the crown. Next, we move to the number 2, which is Chokmah, which is wisdom. And then next, we move across all the way to Bina, which is understanding. That triangle on the top of the Tree of Life forms the supernals, the Great Mother Father, the Divine Mother Father, if you will, if you want. They are the tips of the Chokmah and Bina are the two tips of the tops of the 2 pillars or paths as they're understood. So you have left-hand path, which is where Bina presides over, and then you have the right-hand path, which is what Chokmah presides over, moving downward. 4 on a pillar, 3 on a pillar. Middle pillar from Keter is going to be, Keter moves to Tiphereth, down lower, and that is the middle pillar. And these right-hand path, left-hand path, middle path are the right-hand path is the path of mercy, left-hand path is the path of severity, and the middle path is the path of balance, just like you would imagine a middle path to be. I love Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff is one of my first spiritual teachers that gave me a working model of the cosmos that I still have not seen the bottom of. I've spent the most time studying Gurdjieff. That corresponds to Gurdjieff's law of 3, which is affirm, deny, reconcile. Reconcile is the middle path of balance. You have an affirming principle, you have a denying principle, forming a polarity, and in the middle of that is the reconciliation between the both. Once the both are reconciled, you can move on to the next polarity and reconcile that polarity, okay? So typically you can move through the paths any way you like. However, the suggested way to move through the paths is Keter to Chesed to Bina, Keter to Chokmah to Bina to Chesed, which is 4, associated with the number 4. And Chesed is loving kindness. That is, number 4 has many associations, but if we move from an affirm, deny, reconcile triangle, we move to a square in geometry, which is bringing the dimension of space. Grace rules the space. Loving kindness, as far as you can see. Okay. There we go. Those are some of the Tree of Life correspondences that I kind of glazed over. We're only concerned with 2, 3, and 4 because those correspond to, currently, because those correspond to the 2 of Wands, or the first 3 decans of Aries. The 2 of Wands, the 3 of Wands, the 4 of Wands. Okay? We just got done with the 2 of Wands, the Lord of Dominion, and we're moving to the 3 of Wands, which is the Lord of Perfected Strength. The ruler of the 2 of Wands, planetary ruler, and remember what we said about ruler, it's the emanation, or the channel of the will is most comfortably expressed, the will of Mars is most comfortably expressed through the channel of the 2 of Wands. The 3 of Wands that we're currently in, it is the will of the sun is most comfortably expressed. So the ruler of the 3 of Wands, the middle decan of Aries, it's the fixed decan of a cardinal sign, Aries, is the sun. So we move from Mars to the sun. This is a very powerful pairing, if you think about it on many levels. Okay, so that's our move. We're straddling between the 2 because I'm kind of wrapping up the last one, moving into the next one. All right. Then I also referenced planetary days as a concept. And this is a concept that's existed in planetary magic for a long time. Planetary days are really cool to look at because if you think about language, you kind of see a Tower of Babel moment when you think about what planet rules what day. Monday, Moon Day, Monday. Tuesday is Mars Day. Wednesday is Mercury's Day, miércoles. Thursday is Jupiter's Day. Thor's Day. Thor and Jupiter, Thor's Day. Those are corresponding. Thor and Jupiter mythologies are kind of overlapping. Thor's Day. Friday is Venus's Day. Aphrodite, Venus. Saturday, Saturn Day. Sunday. Very straightforward. Traditionally, it's thought that at sunrise on the day of that planet's rulership is when it's best to do petitions, sing songs to, interact with, connect with the deities that are corresponding to those planets. Sunrise. Now, we also divide the day into 12 daytime hours, 12 nighttime hours. But, as I sort of suggested before, those are not throughout the year equally divided like we have on a clock. So, there are 12 divisions of nighttime, 12 divisions of daytime. So for the first hour when the sun is rising on any given day is going to be the day, or the time that it's best to speak with, contact that particular being. Now, another thing that's really interesting is to start to look at the 4 directions in relation to this. So, 4 directions are in the east, where the sun rises, is the rise. There's a hand gesture for it. The rise, when you're in the east. The reach is the midheaven point. The reach, okay? Now, often people think that the midheaven is directly above them. That is not actually what's going on. The midheaven is the highest point along the ecliptic pathway of all the planets, the highest point that it reaches before it begins to go to the set, which is when the sun goes down under the horizon. Sets. corresponds to my name. And then we have the whole Horus, Set, mythology that we can talk about as well there. But Set is associated to chaos. He kills Orion, Osiris, chops him up into 14 pieces. Anyway, Set. And then the final one is the root. So the root is the lowest point on the ecliptic line that we cannot see from where we are standing when the planet roots down into the root. From that point is when the sun begins to rise again. So, is that a potent time for contacting a rising entity? Should you meet one at midnight? Something to be explored. Also, can you feel when the root is hit by the sun? That's another interesting idea. Okay, so that's the 4 directions. I wrote some notes because it's just a lot. Okay. Next, I would like to talk about what I suggested that I'm thinking about when I'm doing these Decan walks. So I'm looking at 10 days, and one of the things that I'm doing is working under the idea that there are 12 constellations of our zodiac that we have tracked throughout the years, throughout many, many years. And then there are 36 Decans in the northern hemisphere, which are perhaps, nobody's saying this for a fact, perhaps associated to 36 constellations. And so I thought that I would look at sunrise on the eastern horizon for these 10 days, see the constellations that were peeking up over the horizon, see if any of these stories spoke to me, were asking for my attention. I published some of those pictures that I took from the last 10 on the Patreon. What's rising up over the horizon on the first 10 days of Aries season for the first Decan is they're all aquatic symbols, at least according to going back as far as the Greek. We have Cassiopeia, we have Andromeda, we have Pegasus, and then we have Cetus the Whale. And I thought really interesting when I was taking my pictures using the night sky software, I had accidentally locked my finder onto Diphtha, which is a star in Cetus. And when I was taking a photo as the sun was coming up on the horizon, on the eastern horizon, and you saw Cassiopeia sitting on her throne, it had a circle with an arrow pointing down, and it said 33 degrees, which is the age that the story of Jesus, where the story says that Jesus was crucified, 33. He had his underworld story. So Cetus the Whale was under the horizon in the underworld at that exact moment, accidentally locked on Diphtha, which is known as either the heart of the whale, Cetus the Whale, or conversely, the tail of the whale. And that just depends on how you look at the constellation. When I look at the constellation and I think of a whale, I see it as the heart of the whale. When you look at the constellation and you flip it exactly, it looks like it could be more the tail of a sea monster. Now, I think that Cetus the Whale, it's a she, by the way, has received a bad rap, bad reputation in the past. There are all kinds of, when you go into the Arabic names, you go into the further and further back, and you take away the names etymologically, is that a word? I don't know. You get a lot of negative associations. There's even some star-watching Christians who love to associate Cetus the Whale or Cetus the sea monster with the devil themselves. I don't see that. I see Cetus as a very, very ancient, wise being. I think whales are fascinatingly wise creatures. So the whale that has the biggest heart of all mammals is the blue whale. That's bigger than a car. It is a gigantic heart. A human could swim in the arteries of a blue whale. Can you imagine? That's a big heart. And then Dipda, the star that is the heart of the whale, Cetus, is billions of years old, as far as we know. That heart has been pumping for billions of years old, for billions of years. And blue whales, and some other whales, I believe as well, but at least blue whales have something that is sometimes known as a heart song. A heart song is a beautiful concept. Each whale puts together and perfects their very own song from the time that they're born until the time that they die, and they only ever sing their song, and they only ever evolve and perfect their song. And individual songs marry with other individual songs, and they form cliques and groups band together and form kind of like group songs. It's a really, really potent idea. So I believe that Cetus the Whale has a deeply wise song that she is singing that we would be perhaps wise ourselves to try to tune into. Then you look up at Cassiopeia, who also, I think, perhaps is a negative story that is hiding something more profound. Cassiopeia, she's called the Vain Queen. And the story for the Greeks was that she proclaimed that she and her daughter were the fairest of everyone, and that she was punished for this, I believe, by Poseidon, by being required to chain her daughter Andromeda to a rock so that she could be eaten by Cetus the Whale. And then who comes to the rescue? Perseus, who's holding the head of Medusa, who he just chopped off, and he saves her riding on Pegasus by putting the head of Medusa at Cetus's face right before she is about to eat her, and turns Cetus to stone. So, the Vain Queen. Then I thought about the Lord of Dominion, and about the Emperor who has conquered all, the Lord of Dominion, the Vain Queen. Is there a softer story here? Is there a story wherein she's following a path of wisdom? If you look at Cassiopeia in the sky, it's one of my favorite, the first recognized, besides the Big Dipper, constellations in the sky that I ever started observing, and it's a W. It's a W, which some people say that could be the three-pronged, the Neptune's, what's it called? You know what I mean. Anyway, but it's a W, and then it slowly throughout the year turns to a 3, and then turns to an M, and then turns to a backwards 3, and then turns back to a W. That's pretty cool. That immediately made me begin to think about Pisces, the end of Pisces, into Aries, in a healthier way, in an evolving way, as being about the unification of the masculine and the feminine principle. Masculine, feminine principle. Unification, law of 3, affirm, deny, reconcile, coming together. So that queen is residing over this process. And instead of vanity, she's holding a mirror in a lot of the images for the stars. Instead of vanity, perhaps she's holding the mirror that is the reflecting mirror that is of self-observation to give the consciousness of I am to the emperor so that he can see himself, reflecting back on him his negative traits so he can choose to correct his negative traits. Reflection. The mirror is a really important concept in many strains of self-development. The mirror. You ask others to hold the mirror to you, and it's very, very uncomfortable. This is related to the Medusa story as well, but it's an uncomfortable process, but it's a process that's done out of love, so that you can see the parts of yourself that you would like to be other than. Okay. Let's go back to Gurdjieff there. No, let's not go back to Gurdjieff. Let's go to Pegasus. Pegasus. Beautiful story also. Pegasus was born of the seas, of the frothy seas, and they are a winged horse that flies from the seas, from the froth of the seas, okay? Pegasus was not seen as a winged horse in Egypt. It was mostly delineated. If you look at the constellation, you see a almost perfect square. There's a perfect square there. 4 stars forming a perfect square. Anyway, that's the main body of Pegasus. In the story of Pegasus, at one point, Pegasus strikes their hoof on a stone, and cosmic waters spring forth. The magical striking of the hoof on the stone springs waters forth. That's a really cool image. Then you have the Egyptian idea of the square, and some think that the Egyptians thought of it as a mast of a ship, the 4 corners of a mast of a ship. So that's interesting. I also think that it could be thought of as a well. The well of 0. The well of 0 degrees Aries, over which it's almost exactly at that point in the sky. What from this well springs? Hope? The hope of all number? 0. 0 is not a number, it is the absence of all number. 0 is the absence of all number from which all numbers spring. Every single number and its antithesis equal 0. By this logic, 0 comes from everything. 0 comes from 0, 0 is 0, 0 is everything. Okay, so there's 0. Interesting. That was an old Not Blood Paint quote for you old heads. Okay, 0. Hopewell. Hopewell. That's the name of the group of indigenous people that populated the eastern Michigan to Florida. And they were nomadic, they thought. Some stayed, but many traveled seasonally. Go back to that. Okay, so that's 0. Let's go to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's get all the decans of Aries. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. 0 degrees Aries is equinox time. Why is it 0 degrees Aries? It is perfect balance because there's equal day and nighttime at that exact day. It's the only day except for 0 degrees Libra where there's complete balance. And if you look at the glyph of Libra, you see the horizon. If you look at the glyph of Pisces, you see the horizon. If you look at the glyph of Aries, you see female anatomy. You see the horizon, but the way you see it is if you're looking on the eastern to the east as the sun rises, or if you're looking directly to the east at equinox time, you will notice, if you were to speed up time, you will notice that all the stars turn like this. like the horns of a ram, turn and spin this way, turn and spin this way. And then Cassiopeia, who's a little bit further up this way, she spins this way. These this way. Those are the southern hemisphere decans. So perhaps we have constellations, 36 of them, that describe our story in the northern hemisphere, and then also 36 equaling 72 total decans, 36 in the southern hemisphere. Okay, that's an interesting idea. I would love to explore that further. There's so many inanimate objects described in the constellations of the southern hemisphere. I feel like there's so much more going on there than we have begun to dig into. Okay, so 0 degrees Aries, 1 first decan of Aries, 2 is the 2 of Wands, 3 is the 3 of Cassiopeia, 4 is the 4, the square of space, that is the body of the magical Pegasus flying horse. Or 4 is the mast of a ship, and diphda is the tail of the whale, the rudder. Now let's go back to that eastern horizon on the ascendant. If you look at a birth chart, you find your ascendant on the left-hand side of the chart, but the sun typically rises in the east. So you flip it, it's like you're looking at from the heavens. This is one way to think of it. You're looking at a birth chart as if from the heavens. Anyway, you look at the eastern horizon, and that line where the sun rises, that's your ascendant on a birth chart. And the ascendant line is the rudder of the birth chart. Why is it the rudder of the birth chart? Because it moves across time, up and down, and steers the ship. What is the up and down motion? It is the wobble of the planet moving in relation to the ecliptic line. It's the rudder. So there's more aquatic imagery. All right. What else do we got here? What do we got here? Okay, now let's go to Gurdjieff. Well, we'll start with a person that Gurdjieff dissed back in the day, which was Aleister Crowley, who's the maker of the Thoth deck. There's a legend about Crowley visiting the place where Gurdjieff was working out of, Puri, and the minute that Gurdjieff saw Crowley, he called him Merd of Merd, and kicked him out violently. So they weren't fans of each other. However, I believe that there was a lot of overlap in their thought process. They had vastly different approaches. Regardless, what Aleister Crowley says in, I think it's Book of Thoth, it might be Liber 777, says, every man and woman is a star. Every man and woman is a star. I believe that that is a literal statement. Then we go to Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff had, in his world, the idea that we are not born with will. We are not born with a soul. In fact, it was a very harsh sounding suggestion that humans must develop will to stop being automatons. And it is through the process of will development that a soul is born. A star is born, a soul is born. Will development. Why are we like automatons? Because we're all run by automatic functions. Gurdjieff saw humans generally in their natural state as sleepwalking through life. And it's only through the process of self-observation, mirror work, self-observation, that you can catch a glimpse of yourself and see you acting in certain ways, and then over time you can build up the energy to eventually be able to do. His assertion is that no man without great effort has the ability to do. I think that's a very interesting, while harsh, very, very evocative idea. And I've found through many, many years of self-observation that that is true for me. However, it's not all bleak, because you look at the automaton image and you think of a very badly functioning factory. And you can patch up the holes of your factory through self-observation, create a perfectly homogeneous, or not homogeneously, but harmoniously running chemical factory. Humans can be a chemical factory. Okay, and it's through self-observation, to find the leaks, where the energy leaks happen, where we take an action, and then through slight deviations of falling asleep, we end up back to doing the opposite of what we originally intended. How many times does that happen in your life? Happens all the time in mine. So you can patch up leaks, and then also you can build, after you've patched leaks, you can fill the battery of your chemical factory, fill this cauldron through 3 different types of food. There's physical food, there's bread, there is water, and there's impressions. That's really interesting. You can be fed through these 3 different types of food, which are light to dense types of things. What is impressions if not light? Okay. Maybe it's not water, maybe it was air. I'll have to look back at it again. But impressions, water, bread. Okay? 3 types of food, building up the reserve of battery in the cauldron so that you might do. What does that process resemble? That process, to me, resembles the formation of stars. Stars gather, form a center of gravity. Through the process of gravity, gather more and more chemicals into their core until the process of fusion creates a star. Can a planet become a star? They say no. However, there's a really weird thing where it has to gain a certain amount of mass. It has to be 13 times the mass of Jupiter. And then when it's 13 times the mass of Jupiter, then it's potentially, it could become a star. However, there's something in between there where it's like got to be like 8 times the mass of Jupiter, where it can be a brown dwarf, which is like a star. A planet between the two. Anyway, can a human be a star? Can a human be a star? Can a human create a fusion process in themselves to where they spontaneously produce light? Well, there's a lot of mythology around that. The divine halo of the mystic, the divine halo, the glow, Shekinah glory. Every man and woman is a star. It's not a birthright, though. You kind of have to do a lot of work. That brings me to another constellation that I think is very interesting. As I was doing this observation about Cetus and all of these guys on the northern side, literally today, there was a Robert Edward Grant video where he believes that he found the constellation that associates to the Ark of the Covenant. And amazingly, it is the constellation in the southern hemisphere that is directly underneath Cetus the Whale. So if you're looking at equinox of that ram split of the star systems, it's the one that goes this way. It is visible on the northern horizon for a period of time, but then it goes into the underworld, corresponding to the over and over and over the mythos that happens, like about the dying and rebirthing God, over and over and over, literally so many times. But what is this constellation that forms the exact same proportions as the Ark of the Covenant as far as they knew, measuring from biblical cubits? Fornax is the name of this constellation. And what is Fornax? It's a chemical retort. What was Robert Edward Grant's intuition about what this chemical retort was supposed to be doing? Well, it was supposed to be taking silver and taking gold and reaching the heat of those two elements to form white gold, which is a fusion of the feminine and the masculine. So that's interesting. You know what else he said is that there's it's a rectangular shape, and then it also has little wings coming out of it, and it looks like the shape of the thalamus in the human brain. And what does the thalamus do? It's about the wings connect the left and the right hemispheres, masculine, feminine if you want, but the right and the left hemispheres, and it's a sensory motor loop. It helps with sensory motor processing. Then we go back to Pegasus, okay? And what is the Greek word for Pegasus? Greek, I think, was hippo. Hippo. And there were these beings in myth called hippocampus, hippocampi. Those were half horse, half dolphin. Dolphin and whale. Two really important creatures, I think, that we haven't really paid enough attention to. I think they've got a lot of wisdom that we will be wanting to be paying attention to. Anyway, the hippocampi, you'll also remember, is part of the brain structure. And what is the hippocampi responsible for, according to modern science? Well, one of the things is spatio-temporal reasoning. Your mast, the map. So, the hippocampi is what helps us guide around the zodiac. It's the mast of your ship for Jason and the Argonauts. And then right above all those guys, all of those constellations, is Lyra. And oh my, I'm already at 46 minutes, but Lyra is also really important to me. Lyra, let's do a little bit on Lyra. Okay, so Lyra is a lyre. It has, I told you about Vega. Vega is one of the stars in Lyra. Lyra is often in ancient depictions of the constellations. It's either a lyre, harp, or it is a bird. And usually it's thought to be a vulture. I once, about a year ago, I believe it was, did a meditation where I was taken to Lyra and I met the vultures of Lyra. What they did, they told me they were doing me a service, but it was the most terrifying thing ever, is that they opened up my heart and then they pecked out all of these impurities from my heart so that my heart could function better. It could function better. Picked out impurities. What is the alchemical process of taking a base metal and turning it into gold? You're removing the impurities and then recombining the elements. Okay, so Lyra is a bird. It's a vulture often. However, there's also a really interesting bird that is literally called the Lyrebird. And what does this bird do? Remember the whale song, right? This bird takes sounds from its environment, from the moment of birth, and then it recombines these sounds that it hears into its own unique song. And they have found Lyrebirds that live near cities that reproduce perfectly the sounds of construction sites and all kinds of crazy things mixed all together. Your unique, every Lyrebird has their own unique song. Crazy. Okay. Harps, lyre. Hermes was the inventor of the lyre, inventor of music, and then they say that Hermes was the inventor of music, but Orpheus perfected it. Okay, Orpheus was the one who played the lyre as the Argonauts drove or rode on their journey across all the constellations, doing all these trials to get the golden fleece, Aries. Okay, so you know, how is Orpheus doing this? He was helping them keep the rhythm of the row. And they say that Orpheus could play a song that could enchant every animal. And then the hymns of Orpheus are, they say that Orpheus was a rebel because he refused to only honor the gods that were ordained the most important gods, and he went to every other people, all the other people, and he crafted specific songs of worship to their gods. He was an always smile figure, if I've ever heard one. He crafted the most beautiful individual songs to each of these individual deities, bringing the worship of the divine in its multitudinous form. Amazing, amazing stuff. Who was another person that had a harp? Well, David. What about the 12 tribes of Israel? Okay, 12 zodiac signs. David. What's interesting about David? There's a Star of David. What if the image at the center of the earth is a Star of David, and that it shoots out its pulse to the cosmos, which reaches all the way out to the lyre, and the lyre is what plays. It's the heart song of the earth. What if every 12,000 years, when Vega is our pole star, was it 12,000 years? 12,000 years ago it was our pole star. So what about if periodically we must return to Vega as the pole star? And what about the idea that we must rebirth the human story again through song? How will we do that in the age of Aquarius? Well, it's definitely going to be about the, instead of the school of fish, it's going to be about the individual and individuality being birthed, and then the collective. It's going to be about circles. It's going to be about groups, each bringing a facet of the diamond, a facet of the light through them. Okay. That's a lot. That's a lot. That's a lot. That's a lot. Why else? Okay, well, no, let's really a little tiny bit more about Lyra, if I can. I'm sorry, I'm going so long. A little bit more about Lyra. All of the stars in Lyra are egg-shaped, which to me immediately makes me think of the Orphic egg. And what is the Orphic egg? Inside the Orphic egg is birthed a protean type of being. I can't remember the name of this being, but I believe that that is the human being. And the human being is a Proteus. The human being is a ever-changing, metamorphosizing being. Now, is the human being, it's a twofold process, I think. I don't think that it's just the winds of fate and it's just free will completely, right? It's a blending of those two principles. I believe that that's what metamorphosis is that it's inspiration and then work, inspiration and then work, inner to outer, outer to inner. Okay, maybe that's enough about Lyra for now. What has been happening this month and these last few months that make me think about the reunification of the divine feminine and the divine masculine principles? It's been very supported in our skies as far as I've seen. First of all, there's been a Mars journey. Mars opposing Pluto has been happening for 6 months when it normally takes a couple of days, because Mars went into a very long retrograde. For 6 months, Mars has been moving in and out of opposing Pluto. Those are two masculine beings who are very different octaves of their masculine expression. And Mars has been rebirthing himself, going into the underworld and coming back up, going into the underworld, coming back up. How else has the sky imagery suggested that there's a rebirth of the masculine, a potential healing of the masculine? Well, Every 19 years, there is the moon goes so far out of bounds that they created certain stone structures that show that during very specific times of the year, every 19 years, that the moon, when it rises, walks across the earth. Well, that happened this past, or it's still happening currently, but it made it such that the moon gobbled up Mars one day, a couple months ago. An occultation of Mars by the moon. I watched it in binoculars. Mars went in and then came out the other side reborn. Masculine, feminine. Rebirth through the feminine. Okay. Venus, also an 8-year cycle. In 8 years, if I'm remembering correctly, makes a pentagram shape across the zodiac as it Cassimis the sun, and that's a death and rebirth process. Cassimi is the name of a planet coming together with the sun. As it forms Cassimi, it does that in different constellations, and then in 8 years, once every 8 years, it does it in Aries. So that's another very potent rebirth moment where Venus gets covered up by the sun, and she disappears into the underworld for 10-ish days, I believe, and then she's reborn again. And the way that looks for Venus is that she's an evening star, and then she's reborn again as a morning star. That's just happening right now. That happened in the first 10 degrees of Aries. And then we go back to Neptune. Neptune in Aries. That is another interesting blending of these principles. The last time Neptune was in Aries, many things happened, but one of the things that's the most interesting to me is that there was the burst onto the scene of spiritism. So suddenly, spontaneously, all over Europe and the America and the United States, people were contacting the dead, forming seances, holding seances. I can't remember the name of the slime that people were table tapping, all these wild things. And then in the 1860 something, a British preacher in the Industrial Revolution, right? So it's like everything's becoming more and more mechanical, right? And then there's this spiritual crisis where the ingress of the spiritual world comes through in a really chaotic, wild way, the dreaming world. Well, there was a preacher named William Stanton Moses who, humble preacher, never asked for anything like this, suddenly was contacted by a group of 49 spirits that taught him a revision of his entire spiritual worldview. And at the helm of this spiritual group was a being that he did it through automatic writing, was a being called Imperator. And he always signed it with a cross and Imperator. The cross is the Templar thing. That was pretty interesting. So Imperator. And William Stanton Moses created a book called Spirit Teachings, published in the 1880 maybe, I forget. Anyway, created Spirit Teachings, and that was one of the first documented channeled texts, and it's fascinating and it's rigorous, and it inspired me back in like 2021 when I read it to start a song. And I started a weird intuitive journey. The way I make these songs is I make loops and then I start to improv lyrics over them. So I started this song, and then I found the story of a different Imperator. And this Imperator was an ocean liner. This ocean liner was a German ocean liner that was made like within the same time frame, maybe a year or two after the Titanic, could hold more than Titanic. It had a red eagle at its mast, red eagle associated with Aries, okay? Had a red eagle at its, or not at its mast, but at its helm, I think it's helm, at the helm. and it had the phrase in a flag over it, Mein Feld ist die Welt. My field is the world. Very, very Aries of that time period, at least. Okay, this ship was taken for reparations, and then it was used to shuttle soldiers, American and French soldiers, to and from Brest to New York, and from Liverpool to New York. And at a certain point, it received some damage. Its rudder got damaged, and it made it so it listed. And there was this one captain. He was a real character as far as I picture him in my head, named Captain George Seath. And he renamed this Imperator Lymperator. Okay, so in my song, I start talking about Imperator, and I'm trying to blend these two worlds together, this spirit teachings world with this ocean liner that gets taken out of the spoils of war and is used to transport soldiers, and then is used to transport luxury, like 5,000 people in luxury cruises across the oceans. And then I started to realize that it's a story about the amnesiac nature of the human, how we're forgetting our history, how we move across the ocean, and in the moving across the dream state, we arrive at a new land and we want to stake our claim and we think this is our new world. But really, who lived there before? It was the whole Hopewell people. The Hopewell people were back to them. And then you look into the history of the Hopewell people, and then you look into history, and it's written about in the Bible during, David's time, David and Goliath. You have this whole history of giants that occupied all of the Americas. And what happened, I believe it was in the early 1900s, there were grave sites upon grave sites upon grave sites in these Hopewell mounds that were filled with the bones of giants. And they were stolen and taken to the Smithsonian, and then the records were erased that they ever existed. Who are these giants? As we densify, do we forget? And in a time of remembering, is it our role to become lighter and lighter and lighter, to let more light in so that we might remember? And then we're back to Orpheus. The Orphic Hymns and the Orphic mystery schools, among many others, but specifically them, believed that when the human died, you were immediately awakened with in the waters, in cosmic waters, and you're parched, and everybody drinks from the lake that's right there, but it's the lake of forgetting. And when you drink from the lake of forgetting, then you must do this all again. However, the Orphics believed that there was a further lake. Mnemosyne was the goddess associated to this lake, the spirit associated to this lake, and Mnemosyne was the lake of remembering. And if you drank from the lake of remembering, you remembered that you were a god, and then you moved on to whatever you were going to do next, and you didn't have to go through this cycle of reincarnation. So, again, going back to the Gnostics, I don't think that this is a prison to be escaped. I think that the time we are currently going through, ultimately, yes, I do believe that all returns to the One. However, I think that we are trans-density beings that are helping our planet to move into a higher density through the act of remembering our true nature while still being in the body. Perhaps then, after accomplishing this amazing task, We might become creators of our own right. We're practicing that right now. We've only destroyed out of our own amnesia. To this point, as far as we know, the records are erased every 6,000 years. How do we really know how far we got before? Okay. That was a lot. This is more than I ever talked. Okay. It's been an hour. It's been fun for me. I hope it's been fun for you. I'll start with the beginning of this next, or I'll end with the beginning of this next decan. I will try to do one more talk about Decan 2 of Aries. It is Aries in Aries ruled by the sun. The Three of Wands ruled by the sun. The most interesting thing about this is that there was, if a magician from medieval times, say, was to employ decanic magic as prescribed in the Picatrix, the Arabic astrological magical text from that time period, you were to craft your sigil to the being, but you were to do so when that being was in the decan that it ruled, which only happened so often, right, in a year, and it was different each year, right? We have just entered, starting April 1st or 2nd, I can't remember, a period where if Decan 2, the Three of Wands, is ruled by the sun is currently in the second decan of Aries. Therefore, according to that school of astrological magic, it is a time where one could do appropriate decanic magic. Petition that god. I'm not interested in petitioning that god, but I do want to recognize that the sun is in a very beautiful, comfortable place right now, and that I would like to observe, honor, and send my respects to the sun for these 10 days, more than I normally do, because the sun is literally the source of our life. But I want to take this little time and to show my reverence for the sun. Thank you for listening. I hope this was fun. It got dark as I was talking. The bugs went away. Anyway, I'll be back soon.
Watchers who stand atop mountains, holding our skies in place, grant us the safety of passage, keep us alive and awake, return us our memories' grace, return us our memories' grace, so we can lift up our roots through space, lift up through space.